Welcome to a new telling of a beloved classic. This is not an abridgment. It is a reimagining, faithful in spirit, original in expression. Settle in and enter the world of the March Sisters. 4 distinct hearts bound by love, tested by hardship, and shaped by the quiet, relentless work of becoming. In a home where warmth must be made rather than purchased, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy learn that growing up is not a single moment, but a series of choices. Some brave, some flawed, all deeply human. Here, ambition wrestles with duty. Pride gives way to humility. Love evolves from longing to loss to something steadier and more enduring. Through laughter, sacrifice, and the fragile beauty of ordinary days, each sister charts her own path toward meaning. This story edition preserves the soul of the original narrative while bringing clarity, pace, and emotional immediacy to every scene. The result is an experience that feels at once timeless and vividly present, elegant, immersive, and deeply felt. Listen closely. Within these pages is not only a story of 4 sisters, but a reflection of the quiet battles we all fight, the longing to be more, the fear of not enough, and the enduring hope that, in the end, we may grow into the very people we are meant to become. Act 1. Christmas arrived in the March house with a kind of brave poverty. Thin curtains against the cold, careful candles burned low, and 4 sisters gathered near the hearth, as if warmth were something they could multiply by sharing it. Jo lay on the rug, with her chin in her hands, staring into the fire, as though it had personally disappointed her. "It does not feel like Christmas," she said, "when there is nothing to open." Meg, seated upright with mending in her lap, looked down at the faded cuff she was trying to restore to dignity. "There are worse tragedies than no presents." "You say that because you are noble when it costs nothing," Jo replied. Amy, the youngest, lifted her head from a sketchbook full of ambitious faces and badly proportioned hands. "I think it is humiliating. Other girls will receive gloves, ribbons, perhaps proper paints. We shall receive improving thoughts." Beth, who had been quietly warming their mother's slippers near the fire, smiled. "Improving thoughts do last longer than ribbons." Jo groaned. "That is exactly what makes them so discouraging." Yet beneath the joking, each felt the same ache. Their father was away with the army, serving where the danger was real and the letters too infrequent. Their mother spent her days helping soldiers' families poorer than their own. Money had become something stretched, counted, and sacrificed. Even Christmas had been asked to behave modestly. Meg wished for beauty and ease. Jo wished for freedom, adventure, and a world large enough to hold her restless heart. Beth wished only that everyone she loved might be safe. Amy wished, with secret intensity, to become refined enough that no one would ever pity her. The door opened, and Mrs. March came in with snow on her cloak and weariness in her face, though her smile appeared before either could be noticed. "My girls," she said. At once the room changed. Jo sprang up. Beth carried the slippers. Meg took the cloak. Amy made space in the best chair, then sat close enough to be gathered in. After supper, Mrs. March drew a letter from her pocket. The sight of it silenced them. Their father's words were cheerful, but love trembled beneath every line. He asked them to be brave for their mother, useful to one another, and faithful in the small battles of the heart. When Mrs. March read that he hoped to return proud of his little women, Jo turned away sharply. Amy cried openly. Meg pressed her lips together, ashamed of every vain complaint. Beth folded her hands as if making a promise no one else needed to hear. "I will try," Meg whispered. "So will I," said Amy. Joe stared into the fire. "I suppose fighting one's temper counts as service, though it is a poor substitute for a battlefield." Mrs. March reached back and touched her hair. "It may be the harder campaign." The next morning, Christmas broke pale and cold. Under each pillow lay a small book, chosen by their mother as a guide for the year ahead. The girls came downstairs softened by the gift and proud of the presents they had prepared for her. Gloves from Meg, sturdy shoes from Joe, handkerchiefs from Beth, and cologne from Amy, who had secretly exchanged her smaller bottle for a finer one by spending all she had. Before they could present them, Mrs. March returned from an early errand with grave eyes. "Not far from here," she said, "there is a woman with a newborn child and 6 little ones who have no fire and almost no food. Would you give them your breakfast?" For one silent second, the table looked unbearably beautiful. Warm bread, cream, cakes, preserves saved for the holiday. Then Joe stood. "Yes, before I change my mind." They carried the meal through snowy streets to a bare room where hunger had made children old and cold, had made them silent. There, the March girls discovered that charity was not an idea, but a pair of blue hands warming around a cup, a baby quieting against clean linen, a mother weeping because strangers had remembered her. When they returned home, hungry and glowing, Christmas no longer felt empty. That evening, after a comic theatrical performance staged with curtains, costumes, accidents, and Joe's magnificent certainty, an unexpected supper appeared. Cakes, fruit, flowers, and cream sent by old Mr. Lawrence from the grand house next door. His lonely grandson had heard the laughter from across the way. Joe looked toward the dark windows of the neighboring mansion. "That boy needs rescuing," she declared. Meg lifted an eyebrow. "You cannot rescue every lonely boy you glimpse over a fence." "No," said Joe, "only the interesting ones." And so, while snow deepened outside and the fire burned low, the first door of their wider world quietly opened. Act 2. The Lawrence boy entered their lives by accident and stayed by affection. Joe first met him properly at a New Year's gathering where Meg tried to be graceful and Joe tried not to be herself. Laurie stood apart near a curtain, handsome, shy, and amused by everything he pretended not to notice. Joe, trapped beside him with a scorched dress and aching feet, spoke first. "I am hiding a disaster," she said. "So am I," he replied. "Mine is boredom." That was enough. By the end of the evening, they were friends. Laurie soon became a fixture at the March house, bringing books, mischief, music, and the bright energy of a boy who had been lonely too long. His grandfather, stern at first, softened under Beth's quiet courage. When she shyly played the grand piano in the Lawrence house, the old man heard not to performance but gratitude. He sent her a small piano of her own, and Beth, overwhelmed, thanked him with a kiss that healed something in him. For a while, happiness seemed possible even in a hard season. Then came the lessons each girl had not asked to learn. Meg visited wealth and returned ashamed of wanting it. Dressed by richer girls, praised and displayed, she discovered how easily admiration could feel like affection. Yet beneath the borrowed finery, She felt false. And when Mr. Brooke looked at her, not as an ornament, but as herself, she understood the difference. Amy, wounded by schoolroom humiliation, learned that pride is a delicate costume, easily torn. When Joe refused to take her to the theater, Amy burned Joe's manuscript in revenge. The pages were years of secret labor, and Joe's grief turned savage. "I will never forgive you," she said. The words became a wall. The next day, Amy followed Joe and Lori onto the ice. Joe saw her coming and said nothing. Moments later, the ice broke beneath Amy's feet. There are screams that divide a life into before and after. Lori pulled Amy from the freezing water, but Joe stood trembling afterward, more frightened of herself than of death. That night she knelt beside Amy's bed and wept into the quilt. "I hated you," Joe whispered. "For 1 hour, I truly did." Amy's cold hand found hers. "Then do not hate me for 2. Forgiveness did not restore the manuscript, but it saved something more fragile. Then the telegram came. Their father was ill in Washington. Mrs. March left at once, and the house seemed to lose its center. Meg tried to manage. Joe cut and sold her hair to pay for the journey, laughing too loudly when she returned shorn and strange-looking. Beth worked quietly among the poor Hummels, carrying comfort where their mother had taught her to carry it. By the time Mrs. March was away, Beth had already brought home the fever. At first they thought it fatigue. Then her hands burned, her voice faded, and the little room grew still around her. Joe, who could face almost anything noisy, could not bear this silence. "Beth," she begged one night, "do not go where I cannot follow." Beth looked at her with patient love. "I am only tired, Joe." But everyone knew tiredness could become a country. Amy was sent away for safety. Meg kept the house from collapsing. Lori came and went, like a faithful shadow. Joe sat beside Beth and discovered that love sometimes means doing nothing but watching a breath. When Mrs. March returned, Beth still lived. The doctor called it hope. Joe called it mercy. Weeks later, their father came home thin and changed, but alive. The house filled again with warmth, though not the innocent warmth of before. Each girl had crossed some private threshold. Meg had seen that love need not be grand to be real. Amy had learned humility through terror. Beth had grown more precious because she had nearly been lost. And Joe, fierce Joe, had discovered that the battles of the heart leave scars no uniform can show. On the evening their father sat again by the fire, he looked at them one by one. "My little women," he said softly. No one laughed this time. Outside, winter loosened its grip. Inside, childhood had begun to do the same. Act 3. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, as if unwilling to disturb what the March family had endured. Snow softened into water, branches into green, and the house, though still modest, still careful, seemed to breathe again. But something within the sisters had shifted more permanently. Meg was the first to cross into a new life. Her affection for Mr. Brooke had grown not through spectacle, but through steadiness. Small kindnesses, thoughtful silences, a mutual understanding that required no display. When he asked for her hand, he did so without flourish. "I cannot offer you ease," he said plainly, "but I can offer you devotion." Meg, who had once dreamed of silks and admiration, looked at him and saw not what she lacked, but what she would gain. "I have had enough of wishing," she answered. "I would rather begin." Their marriage was modest, so modest that some whispered it was disappointing. But those who knew her best saw that Meg stood at the altar, not diminished, but resolved. She entered a small home, a narrower life, and found within it a deeper form of abundance. It was not always easy. There were burned dinners, wounded pride, moments when old desires stirred. But Meg learned that happiness is not bestowed. It is built, piece by patient piece. Amy's path led her farther from home and closer to herself. She was chosen to accompany Aunt March abroad, a decision that stirred both triumph and guilt within her. She had longed for refinement, for beauty, for a wider world, and now it was offered. Yet she felt, with new clarity, the weight of what she represented. "I will not be foolish," she told Joe before she left. "I want to be something more than admired." "You always have been," Joe replied, though her tone held a reluctant tenderness. "Just do not come back too elegant to endure us." Amy smiled. "That would be impossible." Europe transformed her, not into someone else, but into someone more deliberate. She learned discipline in her art, restraint in her manners, and perspective in her ambitions. She saw that brilliance required sacrifice, and that talent alone was not enough. It was there, in a world both grand and exacting, that she met Laurie again. He had grown restless, his earlier brightness dimmed by disappointment he did not name. He had loved and been refused. He had imagined a life that would not be his. Amy did not comfort him easily. "You are wasting yourself," she said one afternoon, as they walked beneath the foreign trees that did not belong to either of them. Laurie laughed without humor. "Then I am in excellent company." "No," Amy replied, her voice steady. "You have more than most. You simply refuse to use it." He turned toward her then, not as a companion of childhood, but as someone newly seen. "You speak as if you have never been foolish." "I have," she said. "That is how I know the difference." Their friendship deepened slowly, reshaped by distance, by change, by the recognition that affection, when matured, can become something steadier and more enduring. When Laurie finally spoke of love again, it was without impulse. Amy listened, considered, and answered not with surrender, but with choice. "I will not be a consolation," she said. "You are not," he replied. "You are the future." And so they returned home together, not as children playing at romance, but as two people who had learned the cost of it. Beth, meanwhile, did not leave home. Her world remained small, but it was not diminished. It became, instead, more luminous. For a time after her illness, she seemed restored, fragile, but present. She moved through the house like a gentle rhythm, unnoticed until absent. Yet as the seasons turned, it became clear that her strength was not returning in full. She did not speak of it. Beth had never been one to demand attention, and she would not begin by announcing her decline. Instead, she gave what she had, quietly, deliberately, to those she loved. One evening, as summer softened into autumn, she called Joe to sit beside her. "You are restless again," Beth said. Joe tried to laugh. "I am always restless." "Yes," Beth answered, smiling faintly, "but now it troubles you." Joe did not deny it. I thought I would do great things, she said. Write something that mattered. Become more than this. And you will, Beth replied. Jo shook her head. I do not know how. Beth's hand, light but certain, rested over hers. You will find your way, she said. But do not forget, being needed is also a kind of greatness. Jo looked at her then, really looked, and saw what she had been refusing to see. Beth, she began. Beth only smiled. When the end came, it was not violent, it was quiet, like the closing of a book gently read. The house held its breath. Then, slowly, it learned to breathe again without her. Grief changed each of them, but in Jo it worked most deeply. For a long time, she could not write. Words, once so eager, seemed inadequate beside what she had lost. She turned instead to action, to care, to responsibility, to the small, necessary tasks that filled the days. In doing so, she discovered something unexpected. Purpose did not always arrive in the form she had imagined. It arrived instead in what was required. Years passed. The March house did not remain unchanged. Children's laughter replaced quieter sounds. Visits became arrivals became returns. The world moved forward, and they moved with it. Jo, who had once longed for distant horizons, found her path nearer than she had expected. She wrote, not for acclaim, but for truth. She taught, not as obligation, but as extension. She built something that gathered others, as her mother had gathered them. One afternoon, beneath a tree that had grown alongside their lives, Jo stood watching as Lori and Amy walked with easy companionship, as Meg called to her children from a doorway, as her parents sat together in a peace earned through years of trial. She felt not the sharp longing of youth, but something steadier. Fulfillment, not perfect, not complete, but real. Her father joined her. You have done well, he said. Jo smiled faintly. I have done differently than I expected. That is often the better path. She looked at him, then back at the life unfolding before her. We are no longer little women, she said. No, he agreed, but you have become something finer. Jo did not answer at once. Then quietly, she said, we became ourselves. And in that simple truth, the story resolved. Not with grandeur, but with something far more enduring. A life shaped by love, tested by loss, and strengthened at last into quiet, unshakable grace. And so their story closes, not with an ending, but with a quiet arrival. Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy did not become perfect. They became something far more meaningful, honest, tested, and true to themselves. Through love and loss, ambition and sacrifice, they discovered that growing up is not about leaving childhood behind, but about carrying forward what matters most. Some dreams changed, some endured, and some, in their own time, found deeper and more lasting form than they had ever imagined. If you listen closely, their voices linger, in the courage to begin again, in the grace to forgive, and in the quiet strength it takes to build a life of purpose. This is the heart of their journey. Not grand gestures, but steady devotion. Not perfection, but progress. Not a single triumph, but a lifetime of becoming. Thank you for spending this time with them. And as you step back into your own story, may you carry forward the same enduring truth, that even in the smallest moments, we are shaping who we become.